Welcome to Strip Cover Lit, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I'm Adrian Fort, and I'd like to talk about some poetry. For this episode, we will be talking about I Measure Every Grief I Meet by Emily Dickinson, which goes as such. I measure every grief I meet with narrow, probing eyes. I wonder if it weighs like mine, or has an easier size. I wonder if they bore it long, or did it just begin. I could not tell the date of mine, it feels so old a pain. I wonder if it hurts to live, and if they have to try, and whether could they choose between. It would not be to die. I note that some, gone patient long, at length renew their smile, an imitation of a light that has so little oil. I wonder if, when years have piled some thousands on the harm that hurt them early, such a lapse could give them any balm. Or would they go on aching still through centuries of nerve, enlightened to a larger pain, in contrast with the love? The grieved are many, I am told. There is the various cause. Death is but one, and comes but once, and nails only the eyes. There's grief of want, and grief of cold, a sort they call despair. There's banishment from native eyes, and sight of native air. And though I may not guess the kind correctly, yet to me, a piercing comfort it affords in passing Calvary, to note the fashions of the cross, and how they're mostly worn, still fascinated to presume that some are like my own. When reading this poem, the first thing that stands out to me, besides the fact that it is so Emily Dickinson that you almost expect it to have been penned by some 19th century Weird Al of poetry type character, is the fact that it is an inversion of the classic measure of poetry. Largely, the quality which allows a piece of writing to transcend from being writing into being literature is the emergence of the self from the other. That is, when reading about the Greek gods, I see my own lust, my own greed, my own covetousness, and from this story of the other, I am forced to reflect upon the self. I'm forced to look at my own nature and question the things which I do. That is sort of what literature is. In this poem, it is the speaker looking out, not directly, but immediately enough. After all, our speaker never mentions other people. She does not seem to know any. After that initial line, I measure every grief I meet, the pronouns, they, some, etc., they are never adjusted to be person-centric. This leaves people to be the fleshy bags in which the griefs do their traveling. In this, we are forced into two assumptions, the first of which being, though our speaker uses terms of ownership of grief, she never uses terms of differentiation. For example, if I say my hand, that is a term of ownership. It's still my hand, as part of me. If I say that hand, their hand, some hands, etc., probably not my hands. By this, we can assume that our speaker is the fleshy means of transport. But the speaker is not, our speaker here is not the fleshy means of transport, not the person, but is in fact something closer to the sighted grief. Capital G, mind you, on this grief at the beginning here. I measure every grief I meet with narrow probing eyes. Neither are we, as meaty robots, being addressed directly. It is our grief which is being spoken to. This being the neat trick of the writer looking out and recognizing our grief, or the speaker at least. So, grief to grief, capital G's, we are shown some of the nuance of this world. But our grief is never denounced or said to be lesser than that of the speakers. It is simply recognized. By the way, a note about our speaker. I wonder if it hurts to live, and if they have to try, and whether, could they choose between, it would not be to die. How might one come to question whether or not someone else's suicide would be valid, without themselves constructing an argument for the validity of such actions? So that seems to be a very pivotal stanza for the speaker identifying so heavily with her own grief. And this brings us to the last two stanzas. And though I may not guess the kind correctly, yet to me a piercing comfort it affords in passing Calvary, to note the fashions of the cross and how they're mostly worn, still fascinated to presume that some are like my own. This is the conclusion of the speaker looking out and recognizing us, is it not? The conclusion that our author, we're the author here, the author of our own grief. You can even see the wink on that last line there, those last two lines. Still fascinated to presume that some are like my own. This seems to be the full circle of that inversion of the literary process by which the writer, the speaker, is looking out and recognizing us. Now, I would very much like to continue reading Emily Dickinson poems on this channel. If you have one that you would like us to talk about, leave it in the comment section below.